Welcome to Test Prep Central. Today we're going to do Calculator Workshop 2, creating graphs. In the first example, we're told to graph y equals 200 times 1.05 to the x power with the domain 0 to 20. I'm going to first clear my memory. Second, plus 7, 1, 2. Type y equals to put in your first function. Type 200 multiplied by 1.05 raised to the x power. If the domain is 0 to 20, that means we need to adjust our window, the type window. For your x minimum, your lowest value of x would be 0, and your x maximum is your highest value of x, which is 20. An x scale of 1 is appropriate for 0 to 20, so I'll leave that. When you type zoom 0, that will give you the perfect range to go with the domain 0 to 20. Notice that the y-axis doesn't really show any tick marks, so we're going to change that by adjusting our y scale to something more reasonable. Type window, arrow down to your y scale, and choose a more appropriate scale. And I've chosen 50 for mine. Type second zoom, and you'll notice on the third row it says grid line. If you will highlight grid line and type enter, it will turn on the grid lines for this graph. Now type graph. And you see the graph that is on your handout. Let's go on to example 2. Graph the function g of x equals negative 1/2 times x plus 2 times x minus 1 quantity squared. Step 1, go back to your y equals. You can clear the equation and start over. Notice there's a negative in front, so we'll use the negative at the bottom, the one under the 3. To put a fraction in your calculator, type alpha y equals enter, and it will give you a fraction with placeholders. So you could type a 1 on the top, use your arrow to go down and type a 2 underneath. Use your right arrow to go off your fraction and type your parentheses, x plus 2. Close your parentheses. Open another set of parentheses, x minus 1. Close those parentheses and type x squared to square that. Type zoom 6 to restore a standard viewing window. And that will also graph the function for you. The grid lines you'll notice are still turned on. They will stay on until you turn them off or clear your memory. Let's go on to example 3. The amount paid is a function of hours worked. F of x equals 1250 x plus 3275. Graph the function for a typical 40-hour work week. Step 1, I'm going to go to y equals. I'm going to clear. The next thing I do is type in the function, 1250. The 0 is actually optional, but I will go ahead and type it. Once we've typed the function, we'll need to adjust our window to fit the problem. It says a typical 40-hour work week. So when you go to your window, that's telling you your domain starts at 0 hours and stops at 40 hours, a typical work week. If you're counting to 40, it's probably not smart to count by 1. So let's choose a larger scale, and I've chosen 5. Now to get the y values, we could use the same strategy, but we're going to use a new one. I would like to start at 0. I just like to see the axis on my screen mostly, so I start at 0 usually, but you don't have to. But for the y max, we're going to take the expression for this function, and we're going to evaluate that at x equals 40, because that's the most number of hours this person works, and that also will be the most they can make, which is their y values in the function. So let's open parentheses here and type in the 40. You'll see this on your handout. And once you've typed in the expression evaluated and you press enter, it's going to return a value for that, or the output for that, which is $532.75. The scale of 1 is way too low if you're going out past 500. So I used, again, a scale of 50, but there are other scales that would work as well. All right, once you've done that, you can hit graph to see what this looks like. You are asked in your handout to turn on your labels for the axes. So if you'll go to second zoom, this is your format menu. Down in the middle, towards the bottom actually, it says label off, label on. So highlight label on and press enter, and that will turn on the labels for your axes. Type graph, and you will now see the X and the Y labels on the graph. From my experience, those don't look right for most graphs, but generally when you're just looking at the first quadrant, those labels look pretty good. So that's just, that's optional, but it's something you may want to turn on from time to time. And then finally, it says in your handout to type trace, so the button that says trace, and then follow that with a 15, so type 15, and then enter. This will display a point on the screen, and that X value is the number of hours worked. The Y value are the wages earned, $220.25. Let's go on to example number 4. Going back to Y equals, we'll clear out this function, and we'll type in this new one. The new one is Y equals 1 over X plus 3, and then then to that we add 2. So using the fraction placeholder, type alpha Y equals enter, and on top type a 1. Use the down arrow to get in the denominator of your fraction and type X plus 3. Using your right arrow to get out of your fraction, then you'll type your plus 2. Now, it says in your handout to turn off the labels. So we'll go back to second zoom and turn those labels back off. Highlight label off and enter to turn them off. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and type zoom 6, and that will restore a standard viewing window. And this is the first graph that you see displayed in your handout. Now, we want to trace a couple of values here just to get an idea of what some values on this function are. So type the button trace and then the value 2 and enter, and it will display a point with an X coordinate of 2. You'll notice that the Y coordinate is displayed as a fraction. The older versions of calculators may or may not display that as a fraction. You might see a decimal in your calculator, but that is a feature on the newer calculators, and that's really nice when you don't want to have to round off your answer and prefer an exact answer in some cases. Now, the next one is trace -3. You don't technically have to type trace. If you've already typed it, you could just type -3 and then enter, and it will go to the -3. But you will notice it does display X equals -3, but there is nothing displayed for the Y. And that's because there actually is a vertical asymptote at that location. There is no value. You can't put the value -3 in this function because you can't divide by 0. So that number is not actually in the domain of the function. So when that happens, and it does happen on rational functions quite a bit, that's telling you, that's giving you some information about that function. So it's nice to know you can trace to find any breaks in the graph. If you haven't read the helpful hints, be sure to do so. And don't forget to practice, practice, practice until we meet again. Have a great day.